Hey everyone. So we're going to be focusing on the middle colonies today. The colonies of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware in particular. So you see them right in between there, the southern colonies and the northern colonies. And as we have with the northern colonies and the southern colonies, we're going to be looking at the settlers' motivations for coming to America, and then also the goals and values and ideas that they brought with them, and how these impacted their economics, impacted their society, and impacted them politically. So here we have a quote from an immigrant to Pennsylvania. He was writing back to his family, explaining what he had found in the new country. He said, "We have a free country. One may do whatever one wants. One can settle wherever one wants without asking anyone. We have no shortage of food. Bread is plentiful. If I work 2 days, I earn more than in 8 days at home." So basically, compare that to the ideas of experiences like Elizabeth Spriggs in the northern colonies, or some of the slaves indentured servant in the southern colonies. Johannes is sending back very hopeful stuff: free country, plenty of food, hope for the future, really. So just to compare that to the other colonies we've seen so far, this is a theme throughout the middle colonies. So here's another story. This is the story of Corn Planter. He was a Seneca chieftain. So his tribe was located in western Pennsylvania, and the tribe was starving as a result of floods and frost in the area. And Quakers from that area brought his tribe food and gave them money to buy supplies. You can compare this to the other colonies as well. They're trying to help the Indians. They're trying to help the natives. And Corn Planter was quoted as, "Brothers, we are determined to learn your ways." What that means is they are open to learning the ways of the Quakers, of trying to learn their religious practices, learning their economics and their society, to where the other times we've heard about is usually they're forcing Christianity at the point of a gun, or forcing people to convert. These people are willing to convert because they're getting help from the Quakers. Here's a story of another immigrant, Jonas Aaron. He was a Jewish resident in Philadelphia. He was free to run a business, own land, and participate in government. So you compare that to the northern colonies, where in the story of Mary Dyer, who was a Quaker, who was executed for being a Quaker, even though she's a Christian. In Philadelphia, this man who was a Jew, was able to do all these things: business, landowner, and participate in government. So that's kind of the beginning of the ideals of these freedoms we think of when we think of the United States: the land of the free, freedom of opportunity, freedom to be a citizen, participate in government. So the key to all three of these stories is just realizing how tolerant of a society that was being built in these middle colonies, especially compared to the other colonies in the South, where you were judged by the color of your skin. There were racial policies. If you were darker or you weren't white, you couldn't be part of society. You were seen either as a slave or servant. And in the northern colonies, where if you weren't considered to be the purest of Christians, if you didn't follow a strict religious doctrine, way of life, you could be executed or exiled. In these colonies, there were no restrictions on ethnicity, religion, race, or income. Everyone was free to be who they were. And one of the reasons for this, kind of the main reason for this, is that these colonies actually expanded and they had absorbed colonies of other settlers. So rather than be homogenous from England, to where like Jamestown was an English colony, Plymouth was an English colony. These colonies, the English colony of New York, actually expanded to absorb New Netherlands, which was a Dutch colony along the Hudson River, and also New Sweden, which is a Swedish colony in Delaware, New Jersey. So people from different backgrounds were having to interact and make a life in this land. So they became increasingly tolerant. They were able to work with people and do things. So William Penn is a really important figure to remember for his impact he had on these middle colonies. So Penn was given in 1681. He was handed over a large piece of American land holdings to basically pay off a debt to his father. And so Penn decided to immediately set sail for America, and created the colonies in what are present day Pennsylvania and Delaware. Penn himself was a Quaker. This was a religious practice that viewed things through tolerance and acceptance of other religions, of other ideas. So that was a really big impact on his founding of these colonies. So hence the name Pennsylvania. But what Penn wanted to do was create a holy experiment where they could practice this kind of religion, practice their religion freely in the United States. And he wanted to create a free colony for all mankind. So one of the key teachings of the Quaker religion was that there was an inner light that all people shared, that God worked directly through all people. It didn't matter what descent you were, what gender you were, if you were an African American, a Native American, a European American, a woman, you were all equal under God. So what this meant is they ended up having friendly relations with the Indians. As we talked about at the beginning of the lecture, they were open to helping the Indians, not just getting things from the Indians, not just taking land from them, but actually aiding them in their times of needs, in the natives' times of needs. And so that opened up friendly relationships. They didn't have wars like you saw in the other colonies with the Indians and the frontiers. They also Quakers tended to be fierce abolitionists. They didn't think that slavery was right as they saw that everyone was equal. They were defenders of the enslaved. They called for abolition of slavery starting in 1761. So this is 15 years before the country is actually founded, before the United States is founded. They're calling us a British colony, calling for the end of slavery because they promoted the rights of other people. They promoted the rights of the idea that God shone through African Americans, that God shone through the slaves. So they didn't think that slavery was a just institution. Quakers were also protectors of the incarcerated. So as we saw in the northern colonies, and we've read about, they had really strict laws on everything from having long hair to kissing your wife in public. But the Quakers narrowed the list of 200 offenses from which a person could be executed in England to just two. You could only be executed for murder and treason in the Pennsylvania colony. So that's vastly different. Remember the story of Mary Dyer in the Massachusetts Bay Colony was executed for being a Quaker. Here, there's only two things you can. So it's a really different thing. They're really trying to spread the idea of human rights and creating some of these foundations of our American government. So they also showed compassion for the poor, unlike in the southern colonies where the farmers, the planters were growing rich in the east and kind of have disdain for the poor farmers in the west. These in Pennsylvania, they tried to take care of the poor. The tax rates were actually lower than the cost of running the state itself, so they ran into debt. And William Penn himself actually ended his life in a debtor's prison. He owed over 30,000 pounds. So back then they could have debtor's prisons. So you could throw someone in jail for owing money. So Penn owed so much money from the government that they actually threw him in a jail. So this was a declaration of freedom of religion in the middle colonies, in the Pennsylvania colony. So this declaration declared that all persons living in this province shall in no ways be molested or prejudiced for their religious persuasion or practice in matters of faith and worship, nor shall we be compelled at any time to frequent or maintain any religious worship, place, or ministry, whatever. So basically, this is laying the foundation for the freedom of religion in this country. So these people were allowing other people to worship with them. They wanted to create this holy area, the city where everyone, this colony where everyone could be part of it. Everyone could practice freely and feel welcome. Kind of interesting way to think about these middle colonies is the nursery rhyme or the fairy tale of Goldilocks. In the three bears, she wanders into the house, finds three bowls of porridge. The first one is too hot, the second one is too cold, and the third one is just right. So she continues to do that, and she finds the right bed. They'll show up. But that's kind of how you can think of the middle colonies, like almost like a Goldilocks zone. So it's a mixture of the other two regions to where the North was too religious, too oppressive, and the South was too free to let things like slavery happen. The middle colonies were kind of a good mix of everything. And people actually came to these areas for freedom of religion and for the opportunity to make money. The economy was growing quickly here, as we'll talk about. So as a result of these freedoms of religion and the freedom to make money, the freedoms that were allowed in these areas, everyone wanted to move to Pennsylvania. The population quickly grew from 20,000 people in 1700 to 200,000 people in 1760. So they grew by 10% within that 60-year range. So people are quickly coming to this area. So, because of the religious freedom afforded in these middle colonies, you see a lot of different religious groups who are coming from Europe seeking refuge in these areas. So, of course, we had the Quakers we talked about in Pennsylvania. See our Quaker man there. Have the Huguenots, which are actually French Protestants. They were Calvinists who had been persecuted pretty severely in France by the Catholic majority in that country. Then you have Jews who were coming from all over Europe. Jews have been historically persecuted in Europe, something we'll continue to see into the 20th century. And then you have Presbyterians, which were a reformed tradition of Protestantism that was coming mainly from Scotland, so leaving England, leaving the Church of England, leaving that oppression there. So people were moving to Pennsylvania, and in Pennsylvania, the city of Philadelphia actually became known as the capital of the New World. 30,000 residents lived in Philadelphia by 1770. And this was actually the third largest city in the entire British Empire at that point. So a very large city, the largest city in America at this point. There was also more ethnic diversity in these areas because of religious freedom, different religions coming, different countries. And I said they absorbed New Netherlands, New Sweden. So there were 9,000 Dutch people of Dutch descent and people that come from the Netherlands, and there were 110,000 Germans. So you see a picture here of the Germans and their Lederhosen. This made up 1/3 of the Middle Colonies' population by the Revolutionary War. With the growth of population, the growth of cities, as we saw in the New England colonies, economic opportunity comes from that. So artisans begin to move to Philadelphia and New York to make money, not just to escape religion, but to try to live off that as the economy grows, as we've seen in Jamestown and the other places. More people, there's more jobs that are needed. So more people came to move into the cities, but then also farmers started to move to the western regions of these colonies. And there was a reason why the farmers started to move to these western territories of the middle colonies. It can be described as the best poor man's country. So the poor people would have to move to the west, as we saw in the southern colonies. But here it wasn't mountainous. This actually had fertile soil, a favorable climate. They had good relations with the Indians. Remember, the Quakers got along with the Indians. They helped them out. Indians helped them out. And they had a generous land policy. They were able to acquire land easily because it was pretty wide open out there. They had a lot of rivers that flowed. Rivers are very important for agriculture, obviously, because you need water. So really, this area became known as like the breadbasket of the colonies. They weren't creating cash crops like you saw in the southern colonies with tobacco. These these crops were wheat, corn, rye, things made for bread for human consumption that people could eat. So they were able to feed people, and they were able to use this to spread their wealth. Another thing that really helped their economy is their central location. As we refer to them as the middle colonies, they're right in the middle of the two colonies that we've already learned about. Central location for shipping. They also have deep harbors. Their harbors in there in Philadelphia and New York can get large ships in. That's good for shipping. And the rise of these cities led to a big shipbuilding industry and a big trade industry. Trade from all over the world started coming through these harbors. So as we talked about, this society kind of valued tolerance. They valued tolerance for a lot of different people, but this also meant in their social structure. They had a flexible social structure. So this is where you start to see the seeds of that American dream. You can come here, you can practice the religion you want to do, and it's easy to go from poor to rich. You can become an artisan, you can own your own business, you can grow that business. So a large middle class begins to grow of artisans. So these are people who come here with nothing, and they're able to start a small shop that allows them to buy a small house, to have a life here and not just live off the land like some of those subsistence farmers we saw. And a result of these tolerant policies is also the most liberal political system in all the colonies. Almost everyone, of course, males, had the right to vote, they had the right to own land, and they could worship. There was no state church. The state didn't regulate what religion you practiced. So that's why you could see Jews coming here. You see different practices of Christianity. So you see that it's more liberal than the other colonies. So with these liberal politics, there were other things that came with it. In particular, constitutional amendments. So they create a constitution, but what an amendment is, the people can vote to change the constitution. You can amend it. And the governor had very limited powers as well. So you didn't have a very centralized government like you saw in the northern colonies. The power tended to rest in the hands of the people, the voters. And then there was no compulsory military duty. That means you weren't drafted. You didn't have to go off to war. They had local militias, but there was no draft or anything like that. They didn't force you into military duty. So really, that kind of covers the middle colonies, the key aspects of it, guys. The main thing you want to see is just kind of how it's that Goldilocks zone in between the northern colonies and the southern colonies, and kind of how this area creates a lot of the ideas going forward as the American dream, the freedom of religion, liberal politics, voting. Anyway, thanks for listening.